All right, so for every problem in every industry, in every country, they all follow a similar journey when it comes to getting solved. First, you must define the problem or opportunity, which answers the why question. So why is this important? Second, set objectives and key results. Now, this answers the what needs to happen to reach your goals. So like simply, what does success look like? Next, it's important to create solution options and decide on a strategy which determines the how of the problem. So ask yourself, what could we do to understand the options? Then what should we do to identify the solutions? Lastly, it's time to make a plan and execute it, which solves the who, when, and where part of the problem. This slide outlines a very standard framework, right? Which you may have learned maybe more complex frameworks when trying to solve problems through your life and career. But we find this one to be very effective in its simplicity and its flexibility. We hope you'll find it just as effective as we have as you look to solve complex problems in your life and businesses. Creating a problem statement can help you to clearly define the problem that needs solving. A good problem statement has a few key elements. First, it's quantifiable, which means it can be defined by specific data and information. Second, it's important to the customers and your company. And third, it's not framed in terms of a solution. I find this is actually the biggest one. Remember, you want to first clearly define the problem so you can later determine the solution. This is the what part of our problem-solving process. A great way to think about this part of the program is asking yourself, what does success look like here? You might have heard about objectives and key results because it's actually a core of how Google develops strategy. It sounds simple, but it's actually very effective while also being very difficult to get right. But once you get the hang of it, it will be transformational for you, your career, and your business. All right, so there's a few differences between the objectives you'll set and the key results that are related to it. The objective, of course, is what you want to achieve, while the key results are how you know you've actually achieved it. So for example, your objective might be to launch a beautiful and intuitive new website in time for the holiday peak sales period. But that seems very vague, right? It's really more of an aspirational vision of where you want to be, but like how will you know you've actually hit that objective? This is where those key results come into play. You should establish specific and quantifiable results like 40% of users return to the website within 2 weeks, or maybe user bounce rate from the website is less than 20%, and the website loads in under 3 seconds. If these three things in the key results are all the things you can measure, then they can prove that you've actually met your objective. If we know that these key elements will be part of creating an intuitive website, then we can focus on those key results to actually achieve our objective. So the key to succeeding in the how mode is to use both expansive and reductive thinking. So expansive thinking answers the what could we do thinking, right? And then we switch to the reductive thinking that answers the what should we do question. This takes a large number of potential ideas and then whittles them down to a smaller subset of ideas that are best for solving our problem. So when we think about expansive thinking, brainstorming is one of the most effective ways of generating expansive thinking. The problem is that people generally get brainstorming wrong. You may have been to a brainstorming session yourself, maybe at school or work. Typically, everyone will come into a session for an hour to discuss all kinds of incredible blue sky thinking ideas, only to end the session with no specific plan or action steps. This is an all too common thing, but there are 3 essential action steps that you can take to make those sessions more effective. First, be sure to delegate someone to take the lead. Now, this person will serve to keep the group on track, setting parameters for the group and to hold people accountable in a kind of healthy way for basically not following the rules set by the group. Second, be sure that you are clearly in either the expansive or reductive mode. Try not to mix the two during your brainstorming sessions. For example, when you're brainstorming ideas in the group, someone may be quick to say, that's not going to work. But this is a clear example of one person who's operating in reductive mode when the rest of the group is still currently in expansive mode. And on the other side, someone may say, hey, I've got a great idea, when the rest of the group is currently in reductive mode. And this is an example of them slipping back into expansive mode. These kinds of deviations disrupt the flow of the session and could cause some chaos, right? So it should be a responsibility of that facilitator to be sure that it is clear when the group is either in expansive or reductive mode. But of course, the decision to move from one to the other should all be made by the entire group. Third, leave time at the end for reductive thinking the plan to move forward. This is probably one of the most common failures of brainstorming. The group waits until the very few minutes left on the clock to discuss the plan to move forward. It's that facilitator's job to make it really clear how much time will be allocated for each area, right? To focus with enough time set aside to plan the next steps before that group leaves the room. All right, so once you've brainstormed potential solutions, you can better structure them by using what's called a solution tree. The solution tree is a classic consulting tool that starts with an objective you've outlined in step 2, right? You then build your solution tree on a sheet of paper, whiteboard, Google Slides, whatever works best for you and your team. Once you've added the objective to the left side of your solution tree, so you can see in our example here, it is to increase product revenue, right? And then you further branch out into potential solutions that you've identified during your brainstorming session. These should ideally be what consultants called MISI, right? Which stands for mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So the mutually exclusive part means that none of the ideas should overlap. They should all be separate ideas with their own branches. The collectively exhaustive part of the acronym refers to these branches, right, that encompassing all the space of ideas of the potential solutions. So your solution tree may appear to be growing as you become more expansive in your thinking, but you can, of course, remove branches later in the reductive phase of brainstorming. All right, so let's look at our example. So if the objective is to increase product revenue, the next set of branches will include potential solutions. So we can see our solutions, we've included sell more of the same products and sell new products as our potential solutions. We know that these two ideas are mutually exclusive because they don't overlap. As we look to branch out our solutions further, let's first consider selling more of the same products. We may think about attracting new customers in Europe or Asia, or merely selling more of our existing, in our existing customer base. When it comes to selling new products, a few options could include expanding into the mobile space or expanding into cloud services. Each of these are mutually exclusive and they don't overlap. And so the best way to prioritize our solutions where a large number of options are available is to build what is called a prioritization matrix. So to do that, you would start by taking a piece of paper or whiteboard and you draw a vertical line connected to a horizontal line. At the top of the vertical line, write impact. And at the end of that horizontal line, write effort. Then you add lines perpendicular to your two original lines, dividing your matrix into 4 quadrants. On the impact line, the top box should be labeled high impact. On the bottom box labeled low impact. On the effort line, the left box should be labeled low effort, and the right box should be labeled high effort. Then you take all of your ideas from your solution tree and map them into your prioritization matrix. Based on the degree of impact you expect the idea to have and the amount of effort you expect it takes to implement that idea. All right, so a simple way to make a plan and track its execution is to build a who does what by when matrix. You can set this up in a spreadsheet format using Google Sheets. In the first column, you include the action or work package that needs to take place as part of your solution. Then under each work package, include the individual steps you need to complete to fulfill that action. For example, as part of my solution, let's say I've identified that I need to expand to a new location. To do that, I know the specific actions I need to take include designing the process, building a prototype, identifying the pilot group, and launching and analyzing the results of the pilot. It's likely that you won't be completing each and every one of these actions, right? So the next column, you want to identify the owner of that task. So basically, who will complete this action? Let's say your colleague Rachel will be designing the process for expansion. Next, you want to add a column with the due date for that specific action. This will help your team the same track. You can ask Rachel when she believes she can complete this action. And then, of course, evaluate if this is in line with the rest of the project and the team. And then the next column include the status of that action. You can include categories like on track, at risk, and complete. And then last, a column with comments that can be helpful to leave notes for the entire team, especially when there's a status like at risk, and an explanation, of course, is needed. For example, let's say Neil is working on one of the tasks, but he's out sick for this week. Someone else on the team can see that note and pick up where Neil left off to get that project back on track. So now, if you've ever done project management in the past, you may have created something similar to this tracker, right? There are much more complicated project management trackers and tools that you can use, of course, but it's important to keep it simple so the entire team feels comfortable updating the tracker with their status updates. But for example, if you're building a nuclear power plant with hundreds of people, it would, of course, be much more appropriate to have a way more complicated matrix. But if you're making simple updates to your website with a small team, something like this should work just fine. If you only remember one thing from today, think of the why, what, and how of problem solving. Remember, first define the problem or opportunity, which answers the why question. Second, set objectives and key results. This answers the question of what needs to happen to reach your goals. Next, it's important to create solution options and decide on the strategy, which defines the how of the problem. And last, it's time to make a plan and execute it, which solves the who, when, and where part of the problem. Now, the biggest problem we see for businesses is that they jump into the how phase too quickly. Be sure to spend the necessary time to define your problem long before you try to solve it.